Howdy! Welcome to Aspire Mountain Academy. I'm Professor Curtis, your instructor for this course in Introductory Statistics. In less than 10 minutes, this video provides more practice calculating basic characteristics of frequency distributions. If you think you might need a calculator to help you with the math, feel free to pause the video now and get your calculator ready before continuing. Are you ready? Let's get started. If you watched the previous mini lecture, you should remember we looked at a frequency distribution table for the age of female Best Actress Oscar winners. The age tabulated was the age of the winner when she won the award. So now let's repeat the exercise for the age of male Best Actor Oscar winners. So, what are the lower class limits? I'll give you a moment to make your response. The lower class limits are here, circled in sky blue. There are 7 of them, starting with 20 and ending with 80. Now, what are the upper class limits? Again, I'll give you a moment. The upper class limits are here, circled in green. There are 7 of them, starting with 29 and ending with 89. Okay. What is the class width? Well, the class width here is 10. Remember, to get the class width, you take either 2 lower class limits from adjacent classes or 2 upper class limits from adjacent classes. So, for example, here you could take 50 minus 40. Or you could take 89 minus 79. Either way, you're going to get 10. Now, what are the class midpoints? Well, you can see the class midpoints here in purple. Remember, to get the class midpoint, take the lower and upper class limits for the same class, add them together, and then divide by 2. So, for example, the class midpoint for the first class, 24.5, because the lower class limit of 20 added to the upper class limit, 29, gives you 49, and then 49 divided by 2, 24.5. Now, what are the class boundaries? Okay, you can see the class boundaries here and at the far left in yellow. Remember, the class boundaries are the midpoints of the gaps in between adjacent classes. So you have to use the upper class limit for one class and then the lower class limit for the next adjacent class. Add them up and divide by 2. So, for example, the class boundary 29.5 comes from the upper class limit here for the first class, 29, and then the lower class limit for the next one right next to it, 30. Add them together, you get 59. 59 divided by 2, 29.5. Now, don't forget, include the class boundaries that come before the first class and after the last class. Okay, students often forget about these, so don't you go making that mistake. Notice how all the class boundaries are offset by the same amount. So, for example, let's see here, 39.5 offset from 40 by 1/2. 29.5 offset from 30 by 1/2. So it only makes sense that this first one is going to be offset by 20 by 1/2. And to get the other one, you're just going to offset in the other direction. So you'll add instead of subtract. So the 80 plus the 89 plus the 0.5 gives you 89.5. Let's consider another example. Here we have a frequency distribution table for the number of years an elected U.S. president lived after his first inauguration. You'll notice we have 8 presidents who died in office. Okay, 4 of these were actually assassinated. Okay, so we have James Garfield, John F. Kennedy were assassinated during their first term, and Abraham Lincoln and William McKinley were assassinated during their second term. And the rest died of some illness or medical condition. For example, the first president to die in office was William Henry Harrison, who insisted on giving his inauguration speech outside even though it was cold and raining. He then caught pneumonia and died within the month. Okay, what are the lower class limits for this frequency distribution? I'll give you a moment to make your response. The lower class limits are here, circled in sky blue. There's 7 of them, starting with 0 and ending with 35. Now, what are the upper class limits? Again, I'll give you a moment. Well, the upper class limits are here, circled in green. There are 7 of them, starting with 4 and ending with 39. Okay, what is the class width? Okay, here the class width is 5. I hope you didn't go looking at the first class, see the 0 and the 4, and think, oh, 4 minus 0 is 4, so the class width is 4. Remember, to get the class width, you don't use limits from the same class. You take either 2 lower class limits or 2 upper class limits. But they have to be from adjacent classes. So here you could take, for example, 9 minus 4 gives you 5, or 5 minus 0 gives you 5. Either way, you're going to get 5. Okay. Now, what are the class midpoints? Well, you see the class midpoints here in purple. Remember, to get the class midpoint, you do want to take the lower and upper class limits from the same class, add them together, and then divide by 2. So, for example, the class midpoint for the first class is 2, okay, because the lower class limit of 0 added to the upper class limit of 4 is 4, and then divide by 2 is 2. So there's your class midpoint. Now, what are the class boundaries? Okay, you can see the class boundaries here at the far left on the screen in yellow. Remember, the class boundaries are the midpoints of the gaps in between adjacent classes. So you have to use the upper class limit for one class and then the lower class limit for the next adjacent class. Add them up and divide by 2. So, for example, the class boundary in between the 20 to 24 and 25 to 29 is 24.5. Okay, because the upper class limit of the first class, 24, plus the lower class limit for the next class is 25. Add them together, you get 49. 49 divided by 2 is 24.5. Okay. Now again, don't forget to include the class boundaries that come before the first class and after the last class. Notice here, your first class boundary is negative. There's nothing wrong with that. In this case, it has to be negative in order to be consistent with all the other class boundary values because they all have the same offset by definition. So if you get a negative class boundary, that's perfectly all right. As long as you calculated it correctly, you'll be just fine. That brings us to the end of this mini lecture. I hope you found it helpful. You can find more mini lectures for this and other courses at AspireMountainAcademy.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.